This is most relevant to those organizations that have been through their site visit to understand what happens next, and if you do end up getting a report, what you're supposed to do with it. So first I'd like to start talking about what is the PCR report. And as we go through this, if you do have questions, you're welcome to type it in the chat box. I will leave opportunities to ask questions, and certainly at the end you can stay on if you have time and ask questions that are specific to your own organization and where this fits into your process. But let's start by talking about what is the PCR report. PCR stands for Pre-Commission Review Report. It is contains the findings of the site visit, and it's an opportunity for you to show that you have, after the site visit, continued to improve and implement the standards. The report, it's important to note, does not contain the entire site visit review. It's not even going to contain all of the 3 and 4 ratings that you may have gotten on site. What it really focuses on is those standards that are rated out, meaning 3s, 4s, not demonstrating implementation, that you have to respond to now in order to achieve accreditation. There are going to be additional 3s or 4s, possibly, that did not need such immediate attention, and those we call areas for opportunities. They will be on your final report, and you'll have the opportunity to address those throughout the maintenance of accreditation process once your decision is made. So I just wanted to be clear about what is in this report, and it is just those things that we really want to focus you on addressing in the immediate future in order to achieve accreditation. And this is an opportunity for you to provide more evidence to the Accreditation Commission as they review your organization and make a decision. You may have seen this slide before on our website and other trainings. This goes over the 7 steps of accreditation. As you can see, we are in step 5, the post-site visit report, moving into step 6, where the Accreditation Commission makes decisions. This is another way of sort of visualizing the time frames here. It does take about 5 months to get from site visit to a decision, and that is unless you are expedited. So expedited organizations means that they do not have any 3s or 4s that need to be addressed immediately. Like I said, there could be 3s and 4s that will show up on their final report, but that would mean that they're not going to receive one of these PCR reports. That's about 30% of our organizations. The other 70% are in the category of having to receive this report and respond to it and provide additional evidence. So as you can see, it's about a month after your site visit that the report will be provided to the organization. We can go through this slide to follow along that. The findings are submitted to COA by the team. We review them. We create this report with recommendations. It's going to identify what the issues are and tell you what you can do to resolve those issues. We do give a deadline for when we'd like to receive that report, and that is generally about 30 business days or 6 weeks. There are some circumstances where organizations need less time than that, in which case we do encourage you to respond when you have all the information together, and in some cases that can mean a quicker decision. And there are sometimes organizations that will need additional time, that given the fact that perhaps we're asking for policies to be updated and they need board approval and the board of directors does not meet very frequently. That would be an example of a situation where an organization might say, given where our deadline is, it doesn't really meet within our ability to meet those expectations. So it is possible to communicate with COA. You can reach out to me, Rebecca Knickmeier, if you know that you're not going to be able to meet your deadline, and we can talk about if an extension is appropriate. So I just wanted to make sure that you are paying attention to that time frame and that you note that it is a received date. When we give you a date, it is a received date. So There also are, sort of two different situations where the organization might be discussed with a larger group of commissioners. When there are more significant issues or more serious issues, that's what happens. When I say more significant, it could just be a large number of standards that were identified as not being implemented on site. And then in other cases, if there are just a few things, it could mean a quicker decision as well. So each organization sort of ends up on their own little track, but if you have questions about that, you're welcome to ask me. So we will be sending you a letter. The way that we deliver the information is through your My COA account. So for those of you that aren't used to using that, you might need to reach back out to us if you haven't used it lately, but that's where we will be posting your report, and we'll send you a notification that your report is available, and you'll go there to download it. And then you will have that deadline of 30 to 45 business days. Carolyn had a question about muting the phones. I'm sorry, I actually don't know what the number is to push to mute it. Does anyone else know the mute instructions for these conference calls?
No, I don't know.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Carolyn.
That's okay. I apologize for any ringing you may hear then.
Okay. All right. This is an important question. Why respond? Well, as we talked about, COA is always encouraging you to continuously be making improvements, and if there were standards that you weren't implementing at the time of the site visit, this is an opportunity to show the changes that you have been making, that you've been working on it. We want you to let us know the progress that you've made. Hopefully in the exit interview and throughout the site visit process, you kind of got a little bit of an idea of maybe where some of your strengths were and where things were that you need to work on, so that at the point that you get the report, you might be prepared to start demonstrating how you've made changes to improve things. So this is an opportunity to do that. We do ask that you respond to everything that we ask for. We'll be able to look through a report and kind of how that looks, but we do provide a number of recommendations based on the standard, based on the site visit comments and justifications that identify the issues that were appearing on site. It is possible that you might find that the peer misunderstood how you are implementing the standard, the way that your program works, or maybe perhaps you think that they missed something, that it was in your self-study, that it was there available on site. Those things do happen, and it is possible that you will want to address that in your PCR. This is an appropriate place to mention. This is something that we've been implementing at the time of the site visit. I guess things were misunderstood or missed. That's okay. What's important is that you address each of those recommendations, that you don't just ignore it or not identify the reasons that you're not providing this information. There may be other situations where you think that the recommendation that COA has made for evidence, perhaps you have something within your organization that would better demonstrate implementation of the standard, in which case we'd like you to provide that. If you have a different type of tracking system than what COA has recommended for certain information, great, show us what you're doing, show us how you're implementing the standard. Ultimately, what we want to see is that you are implementing the standard and that you're meeting what the expectations are. So just to summarize once again, we do give a number of recommendations, and we would like you to address each one of those. And if you don't feel that that particular recommendation fits within what your organization does, provide a narrative explaining why you're not sending us that piece of information and why you're sending us something different. So this is the top of what the report will look like. As you can see, it's going to have your organization name on it and your number, a date of when the report was prepared and provided to you, and here is where you will find your response due date. February 17th in this case. It's an older example, but I just want to reiterate that this is a received date. This is an example of what a report would look like. I did want to take this moment to mention, as you may have heard, Council on Accreditation is going through a transition process where we're starting to use a portal for our organizations and for our volunteers. This webinar from this point forward is really geared towards those organizations that are not working within the portal right now. But all of the content up until this point applies whether you're in the portal or not. It's just the report might look a little bit different. The way that we deliver the information and the way that you send the information back to us might be different. So in this case, this is what our report has looked like up until this point. Again, going forward, the report might start to look a little bit different for those of you that maybe haven't had your site visit yet. The report that you get might be structured visually differently, but the content is the same and the information that we're putting in it is the same. The structure of our standards is the same. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to mention that. And please, at the end of this, if you are an organization that is working in the portal and you have some questions about that, feel free to stay on after we're completed with the discussion here and talk to me about any questions you have about how it works for your particular organization. So what we're looking at here, if I can just go through some of the columns, is over on the right-hand side we have the standard, and what we're listing is all levels of the standards. So we're listing the purpose standard, the core concepts, and the practice standard that is important to be addressing here in this report. The purpose and core standards are going to appear on this report even if they were being implemented at the site visit, as in if they had gotten a rating of a 1 or a 2. There will be some core concepts that had gotten a 3. Those will also appear on this report. But no matter what, we're going to let you know overall, how did you do on RPM? Overall, how did you do on RPM 7? And are there any specific practice standards that we want to draw your attention to? In this case, it is a fundamental practice standard that needs to be addressed, RPM 7.02. There might be other situations where it's not fundamental practice standards and we're asking you to respond to them, but just a little reminder of how our rating guidance sort of works is that an organization must have 2s or 1s on all of their core concepts and must also have 2s or 1s on all of their fundamental practice standards. As far as the non-fundamental practice standards, it really depends on other factors as to whether or not those are things that need to be addressed immediately or not. And that could be based on patterns of issues throughout all of the services that you're providing or in the context of the nature of the issue. So just to give you an idea, your report might look different based on those things. So in this case, we have a core concept that was they were implementing the standards to the level of a 2, which is great. But at the practice level, there was a fundamental practice standard that received a rating of a 3. So this needs to be addressed in order to achieve accreditation. So what you'll see in the next column over is the peer team non-implementation reasons, or it might also be called the peer justification. This is the comment and the feedback that the peer is noting at the site visit. We went to the organization, we looked at the standard, and this is where we saw that the organization was not meeting the standard. So this is a really important place to look first. You want to see what were the specific issues that the peer team saw that weren't quite meeting the standard. The next column over is COA recommendations. As a result of the peer team non-implementation reasons and what the language of the standard actually is and the expectations of the standards, we put together some fairly standardized recommendations specific to the issues that you can provide certain evidence to us in order to show that you are actually implementing the standards now. So in this case, there are two recommendations. These are meant to be comprehensive. We want both recommendations to be addressed, both pieces of evidence to be provided. This is not check one, check the other, figure out which one works within your agency. This is meant for you to respond to each and every one of these recommendations. And like I say, there are some reports that organizations might be receiving going forward where those recommendations might be in a separate table, but it still is the same. They're still linked together. The recommendations under RPM 7 are still there addressing the issues of the peer team non-implementation reasons. On this particular form, the final column over here is the organization's response, and this is where you would be creating hyperlinks to each of the documents that you're providing as evidence, very similar to the self-study process. So any of you that were involved in preparing your table of contents for the self-study, this report functions as a sort of table of contents. We have this standardized process just like we do for the self-study so that any reviewer can pick up one of these reports and be able to know exactly what evidence you've provided for each standard. It really helps with the clarity, and we want you to get credit for what information you're providing, for the changes that you've made. So we want it to be abundantly clear to the reviewer what information you're providing for which standard and make it very organized. So what we do ask is that organizations then will go through and hyperlink in this final column. And I have a couple of slides where we can talk through how that works. Before I move on too much further, though, I did want to take the opportunity to pause for a second and see if anyone has any questions about this report, the structure, when things get responded to, how to respond to them, where the recommendations come from, anything around that. Does anyone have any questions about this report and how it works?
No.
Okay, great. Well, I hope that's a good sign that I'm explaining things well. Just to summarize some of what we've already discussed, we do ask for a full and complete response. It's not advisable to skip standards. If you don't think that the recommendation fits within the kind of work that you're doing and you'd like to provide something else, that's fine. Provide a narrative explaining that. Be sure to address each and every recommendation. Once again, those aren't pick or choose. We're asking you to provide each and every one of these. And again, put your response on the form provided. So this is just a little review of how to create that hyperlink. In the organization response column, you'll type the name of the document. It is helpful if the name that you call it in that organization response column on your table of contents is the same as the name of the document in case for some reason the hyperlink fails or things aren't exactly clear. And this is one of those situations where you will start by having a folder perhaps on your desktop that's your COA response folder. Inside of that folder, you'll have two things. You'll have this report, and then you'll have folders of evidence. Again, this is a review of what you might have done at the self-study. All of the links in this report that you're creating are going to point to those folders of evidence. And that way, again, they're right next to each other. And one mistake that organizations sometimes make is creating those hyperlinks and directing someone to a folder that's somewhere else on their computer, on their own hard drive, on their shared drive, something like that. I don't have access to your shared drive, which is why it's important to create this separate folder for your COA response and create your hyperlinks within that folder so that once you drop that folder onto a CD or a flash drive and send it to us, it's all there together. So that's just one thing I wanted to caution you against is having your hyperlinks direct me to a place that I don't have access to. So what you'll do is you'll type the name of the document, you'll highlight it, and then you can right-click or click Control-K that's where you navigate to the document. And like I say, if you've sort of created a folder for that evidence, that's where you're navigating to and creating that hyperlink. So that's just a little review of hyperlinking. Did want to take a minute to go over redacting information. We want to make sure you know you should always be protecting sensitive client information. You should always be following whatever laws and rules and guidelines you are subject to. But we also have an additional level of redaction, and that is that COA uses the commission process as an opportunity to review organizations blindly. So we do recommend that you redact the identifying information about your organization so that we can do that. Some organizations choose not to do this, and that's okay. You're waiving that ability to be reviewed blindly, and again, that's okay. I did also want to mention if there are any Hague agencies that are participating on this call, this does not apply in the same way. You would not be redacting the identifying information of your agency, and Hague has different rules about what's allowed to be redacted and what isn't. So if you have any questions about that, please do contact us and we can walk you through that. But this does not apply in the same way to Hague agencies going through Hague accreditation. Also, just wanted to mention something else, and that is related to performance evaluations and certain other sensitive human resource type things. You know, a lot of times we really aren't asking for the actual performance evaluation. We're really just asking for evidence that it has occurred. And there are other situations that you might have questionable, you know, wondering whether you actually need to provide the document or not, versus just evidence that this activity occurred. If you have those questions, feel free to reach out to us as well. We also have been providing a checklist that's meant to be a helpful tool to help you make sure you've put together the entire package, that you've crossed all your T's, dotted all your I's. This isn't any sort of required form, but it is there for you to do a double check before you send your response off to us. So those of you that got the PCR response checklist, we don't need to receive it back. It's really just meant to be a helpful document for you. Here's another one. When you're submitting your response, as I mentioned, a CD or a flash drive is the typical way that we receive it, just like the self-studies, through the mail. And we do not accept hard copies. We also don't accept email attachments. There are a lot of things that can go wrong with that. There can be differing size limits between your organization and mine. There can be the hyperlinks might not work when you send it through email. So there are a lot of reasons that we don't accept email attachments. However, I know that some organizations have other ways that they deliver information and share files. If you have a unique situation where you'd like to share this response in a different way, please contact us, talk through that so that we can be prepared for it. But 99.9% of organizations put their response on a flash drive or a CD and submit that through the mail to us. I also just wanted to take a moment to talk through what happens next. I don't have a slide for this, but what happens next after you've submitted your response to us. We will receive it. We will assign it to a commission review. They will go over that information, and either they will recommend accreditation or they might ask for additional information. So I just wanted to put it out there that there is a possibility that we will be coming back to your organization again and asking for more information. This is me. This is my contact information. When you're mailing stuff to us, please mail it to 45 Broadway, 29th floor, New York, New York. Here's my phone number. Here's my email address. Please do, again, contact me as you have questions. And this is the conclusion of my slides and my portion of the webinar, but I do encourage you to stay on and ask any questions that you might have about this process. So thank you for participating. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
This is Andrew. I joined.
Hi, Andrew.
Hi. I joined the call a little late, but I think you said, but if you could confirm it, that if we believe that we submitted appropriate self-study or on-site documentation that the reviewers might have missed or maybe didn't clearly enough present it, that would have been like an appropriate response. That I thought you said we could make that response at this time.
Yeah, if you have that situation where perhaps it wasn't clearly communicated to the peers somehow, they misinterpreted or misunderstood or just missed it, and we seem to be asking for the same evidence again, first thing to note is that we're not looking back at the self-study, and that's because we want to make sure that you're really looking at the concerns that the peers had and the standard and really making sure, does that piece of evidence really meet the standard? And if you're confident that it does, then you can provide that to us again and explain how it does, perhaps present it in a different way, explain a little bit more about your process. Or, like I also said, if there's something else that you'd like to provide than what was recommended that you feel will even be a better way to further demonstrate implementation, you could also provide that instead. But it's good if you're deviating from what was requested that you explain it in a narrative preface. Here's what was asked for, here's what we're providing instead, and here's why. Or perhaps if you feel that you've been implementing this for the last 10 years and it was really just a misunderstanding, say, we've been implementing this for the last 10 years. Here's some evidence of that. Here's what we provided in our self-study. This really isn't about getting into the nitty-gritty of what happened on site and, how well you and the peers were communicating with one another. This is a different set of reviewers. They are experienced peers and team leaders who've done a lot of site visits, but they're not going back to what happened on site. They're trying to focus on, can you demonstrate now that you are meeting the standard, whether it was happening before the site visit or has been a change since the site visit. We just want to see that in this moment in time now you are still meeting the standard. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Does that make sense? Okay, great. Does anybody have any other questions?
I have a question kind of on that same line. This is Penny.
Sure. Hi, Penny.
One of the things that came back on our report, and we actually discussed this with the site reviewers, is we felt that the way they were interpreting the standard didn't apply to our agency. Like the way that we are required to do business, we really can't do what they want us to do. Like the way that we have to do it does that go along with, if we disagree with one of the recommendations, we can write that out in a narrative and submit it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. What's important is to address why you're not providing that particular evidence. And yeah, definitely explain how your program actually works and how it's different than the way that, it was being interpreted. And it's really important to look at the standard and say, does the standard apply to me? Are there NAs available that perhaps we didn't request in our self-study, or perhaps the peers disagreed about whether this should be applicable to our agency or not? Definitely look at the notes and the interpretations, because sometimes within the standard there is some leeway within that interpretation where you can sort of look at that interpretation. It says, well, if you have this type of program, you can use that to justify why you might deviate from this particular expectation. And so it's important to pay attention to when it says that, because if you don't use those kinds of reasons, if you use other reasons that don't fit within the standard, then it might be harder to say, you're right, this doesn't apply. For example, it says, oh, well, if your program is more of a stable and long-term setting rather than a short-term setting, we might look at this standard differently. So it's important to explain, well, we're one of those situations where, given the nature of our program, this standard applies to us differently. Does that make sense? Like, really look at the interpretation and what it's saying and draw on that if your organization fits into that category.
Okay, and then if we do submit it and the review team says, no, you still need to change how you're doing things to meet this more closely, then we will get another chance to do that. Right?
Yes,
like
that's
we can
correct.
sort of plead our case and then...
Exactly, yep.
Okay,
And
good.
then it comes down to a standards interpretation kind of thing, yep,
Right.
where we might be pushing back and saying, nope, this is really the expectation. This is how we've been applying this standard across the board to other agencies. We've asked them to change this practice. We're going to ask you to as well. But definitely, to a certain extent, this is a conversation, an opportunity to explain those kinds of things. But that's right, the commission might not agree, and the commission might push back and ask for you to change your practice.
Well, that's okay. We just don't want to get knocked out of the running, you know.
Yeah, no, there will be more than one opportunity.
Thank you.
It would generally, the first commission review, unless there was something very egregious that had happened, it's unlikely that the commission would do a denial on that first review.
Okay,
This is Andrew again. I noticed that through the COA standards, and maybe in response to this woman's question, I mean, COA makes it clear, for example, that if the COA standards might exceed, say, for example, state licensing requirements, the COA standards meant to be reflective of best practices applies.
You were cutting out just a little bit, Andrew.
No, I was just commenting that through the COA standards,
Yes.
there are times when there'll be a comment that the COA standard, for example, exceeded state licensing requirements. Say the COA standard, the higher standard would apply since they're meant to be reflective of best practices.
That's correct. That's correct. So there are times when, as you know, different states have different levels of requirements for some of the same things. For instance, I'm just off the top of my head, maximum number of foster kids in a foster home. That's actually something that varies from state to state. But in some of our standards, we get a little prescriptive about ratios of teachers to kids, about ratios of number of children in the home, things like that.
That's exactly what I was thinking, because one of our programs at Catholic Family and Community Services is a residential treatment facility and school. And there are New Jersey requirements, say, on the number of kids in a room or the room size, certain privacy things. COA doesn't allow, requires like doors on rooms, and New Jersey doesn't require that. And COA, through those standards, for example, makes it clear that the higher level COA standard applies. That's
correct. Doors is one of those things that we do encounter with agencies where that hasn't been their practice, but we do ask organizations to change their practice.
So the person who asked that question is really going to have to find flexibility within the standard itself. It just isn't going to be, my understanding, good enough to say we do this differently or our state doesn't require it. She's going to have to address the standard head on.
Exactly. So saying in and of itself, well, the state doesn't require us to do it, so we're not doing it, that isn't really justifying how you are ensuring you're being sensitive to client confidentiality and privacy, right?
Right.
That doesn't really address the issue with the standard and the intent behind that standard. It's about privacy and respect and client rights. So show us how you are still maintaining respect and privacy and client rights in your model, in your way of designing those rooms. And definitely say we are meeting our state requirements, and also here's how we ensure that our clients are still receiving the level of privacy that is meeting best practice. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me.
Great, great. Any other questions? You guys have all sort of stayed on here to hear this. It is good discussion, actually. I really appreciate your questions. Anyone else have a question? Okay. Great. And I think someone at the beginning had mentioned they were in training as a COA peer, so I hope that this was helpful in sort of seeing the organization's experience through the process. All right. Well, if there aren't any more questions, then I thank you all very much for participating in this webinar. We will be sending you the PowerPoint slides, so you'll be able to have those for your reference. And we'll be sending out certificates of participation for those of you that did register ahead of time. So thanks much, and again, contact me if you have any questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a great day.